Hello. First off, someone left their keys up at the badge box. Felix has them. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Fromme. That's F-R-O-M-M-E, with the E pronounced at the end. I'm your Sergeant at Arms today. In October 1971, Lynn Brown from Hickory, North Carolina, married yours truly as product of the New York suburbs and became Lynn Fromme. Not that long afterwards, less than 4 years, one Lynette Fromme, F-R-O-M-M, also E, but hers was silent, better known as Squeaky. She tried to assassinate then President Gerald Ford. She was a member of the Manson family. Sometime not long after that, my wife talked to her mother in Hickory, who asked the question, is Steve's family kin to that crazy woman who tried to kill the president? The answer was definitively no. We already had a crazy woman in my family. My sister, one's enough for any family. But, moving along, about 50 years later now, this September, I developed some kind of a flu or virus or whatever, and like 2-3 days into it, for the first time ever, got laryngitis. And now it's nearly 6 months later, several doctor visits later, and I still don't have my voice entirely back. And I tell you this because Lynette might have received the notoriety and the jail time, but I think it's about time we realize I am the real Squeaky from E. Do we have any guests today? Tim, I see your guest.
I brought my bride, Kelly Bodger Smith.
Welcome. Anyone else?
Back here.
Back there.
Yeah, I brought my friend George. George is one of New Jersey's favorite exports people. We moved down here a couple of years ago. We lived in the same town here for many years.
Great. Welcome. Any other guests? Visiting Rotarians? No. Okay. Well, then we will start the fire basket. If you are pulling for Carolina tomorrow, put $1 in the basket. If you don't care about the game tomorrow, put $2 in the basket. If you're rooting for Duke tomorrow, put at least $10 in, and you're going to have to answer the question, what in fact are you doing here? And if you want R.J. Davis to come back for one more season, you might consider putting about $10,000 in, okay?
Need some NIL money.
Okay, I would like to share with you the inspirational words of one of my favorite fictional characters, Don Quixote de la Mancha. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest, and the world will be better for this. That one man, scorned and covered with scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to fight the unfightable foe, the unbeatable foe, to reach the unreachable star. You have no idea just how blessed all of you are that I read those words rather than trying to sing them. So in this age of griping, I have some complaints about our education system. Don't worry, Chancellor, they have nothing to do with colleges. I'm talking about elementary school. How many of you remember first and second grade? Yeah, I see the hand, but I don't believe it. How many of you remember where you parked your cars? In the start of elementary school, one of the first things we were taught was how to print. And, that was great. We could write and read a little bit, but then afterwards, we were taught to write in script. And that opened up all new worlds because there are documents from throughout history that are written in script. And script can be a beautiful thing. Not my chicken scratching, which I can't read, but it can really be beautiful. But, everything was great. It was just hunky-dory, as they say. And then at some point, someone decided script was an inadequate title for such a valued skill. It deserved at least a two-syllable title. That decision should have been thought out more before switching to cursing. At some point, you're bound to be those who objected to first and second graders being subjected to something whose very title begins with curse. And there you go. Children are no longer taught to write or read script. And I think it's all because they changed that name. Now, while I'm complaining, I spent so much time as a kid memorizing, more significantly figuring out baseball statistics. And my math skills became quite good. In fact, at my office now, when younger people have a math problem, typically I can, in my head, give them the answer before they can find the app on their phones for the calculator. And I say to younger people in my office, that would be everyone. But I was visiting my family in Charlotte, my grandkids recently, and I was asking them about school, and my granddaughter, who's 9 years old, brought out her math homework and showed me the problems. They seemed, easy enough. Then she showed me how they were being taught to work them using the new math. I didn't know what the heck language they were talking. I asked my son about it. He used to tutor high school students for beer money while he was in Carolina. And, he couldn't help. We were all flummoxed. And I finally figured it out, I think. There are a lot of complaints, and rightfully so, that there's certain families that don't have the privileges of parents being able to help their children with their work, and they fall behind. And so with this new math, it evens the playing field. Nobody can help their children. But despite that, kids are doing great. I see lots of college scholarships coming through the Better Business Bureau Educational Foundation. These kids at 4.0 grade point average wind up with like triple figure GPAs. I don't know how you do that. That's probably the new math. But they also have resumes of service and community work and all kinds of things that their resumes and a lifespan of a quarter of mine are already more complete, and they're fantastic. So something being done right. I feel very blessed that I attended Carolina when I did, and I will admit that there is no way I would be admitted if I were to apply today. And with that admission, let me add an admonition. It's time for President Mike.
Thanks, Steve, for that lesson on complaints on secondary education. I'm sure we all found it very wow. It's so nice to see everybody here today. Thanks for coming out. It's a nice day. We had a great speaker, continuing the tradition of this club with great speakers. I think we have another one lined up today. We had our first pop-up of the spring the other night at the Carolina Inn. For those of you that attended, we appreciate it. We had a great time. Keep your phones tuned in, because we're going to have another one coming up at the end of this month. We had a lot of fun at them. Come out and join us. We're not going to carry on too much longer. I'm going to get Jim Hebner up here now to introduce our speaker for the day. Jim, please come on.
All right, Lee, I want to welcome you here today. In by way of introduction, as I welcome you to Chapel Hill, you can see his credentials when you read the biography, but I'm reminded of Abraham Lincoln loved to tell the story about the congressman who was tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. When it was all over, he said, "If I'd had my choice, I would have rather walked." That's the way we've treated chancellors in our recent history, and so we want to thank you for taking on maybe one of the most challenging jobs, and certainly the most important job in our community, and we appreciate having you with us today. I'll come over and join you.
Wasn't sure where you were going with the target.
Well,
glad to be here.
Well, actually, we're going to talk about what's happened with some of our recent it was metaphorically that. Why don't we start by getting acquainted, Lee? You're new to town, but not to the territory. You grew up, as folks can see in the bio, you grew up in a famous family. Your mom was Cokie Roberts, dad Steve Roberts. So you grew up in a family, and also you're the grandson of the helping with the senator.
My grandparents were both members of Congress from Louisiana.
Yeah.
So my grandfather,
Hale Boggs.
Yeah.
He died of a plane crash, and your grandmother came in and took over that seat. So it's a family of some prominence and all that. So how was it like? Tell us about your family growing up.
We certainly probably had more political conversation around the dining room table than maybe average family. But growing up in Washington, you don't realize that that's unusual until you leave town and realize that doesn't happen everywhere.
Yeah. Did you, were they tough parents?
They travel a lot.
They traveled a lot. You have siblings? You have siblings?
I have a younger sister. She works for the Library of Congress in Washington.
Library of Congress. And Gene, I think I asked you at the table today if you ever thought about going into the media, the honorable profession of journalism and media. And you just, but you said you were at CBS for a while?
1 year. So I graduated from college in 1990. We don't need to talk about where. And, I did. I worked for CBS News in New York. So 1990 was a midterm election cycle, obviously, and so I worked on those midterm elections. And then that summer of 1990 was when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. And so even though my job was only supposed to be through the midterm elections, given how much news was happening, I was able to stay on. But I then went to law school the following year.
And then from law school to where?
I went to one of the big DC law firms and was there for a couple of years. About midway through law school, started to think that maybe I didn't want to practice law indefinitely, and so I went to a big law firm, but then I went and joined a big investment bank from the law firm.
A lot different from what you'll be doing here. How'd you migrate from there to here?
So I left the investment bank I was with. I was with them in both London and in New York. And having spent about the first half of my career there in investment banking, had wanted to get out of New York and maybe get out of a client-facing business. And so I joined a private equity firm who was a client of mine based in Raleigh, and that was 18 years ago now. And so I was at that private equity firm for a while, started what became a platform to acquire small community banks on the basis of their real estate exposure. Started that platform in 2014. Was honored when Governor McCrory asked me to serve as his budget director, did that until 2016, and then started my current firm, which is another private investment firm.
So you went into politics there. You took that political appointment. That was fairly impecunious relative to what you were earning before you got there.
That's true. Nobody goes into state government to get rich.
You get rich. And how did you evolve to the role you have today?
So I obviously had some significant familiarity with the higher education system as budget director. Among other things, we had done a large bond issue, the $2 billion Connect NC bond issue, which was the first general obligation bond in 15 years. About half of that bond went to the UNC system. And so it's actually been a lot of fun traveling around the state, seeing projects that were built with that capital. That includes Roper Hall, a beautiful medical school building on the Carolina campus. And then I had the chance to serve on the board of the community college system. I served on a task force to look at the funding model through which the UNC system is funded. And then I came onto the board of governors and ended up chairing the budget committee on the board of governors. I also started teaching a class in public budgeting, again over at the school that I don't need to name, and a graduate class in public budgeting to Masters of Public Policy students. And so I had ended up through all those avenues having some broad familiarity with higher education, particularly the financing of higher education in the public context. But I'm obviously new to full-time higher ed academic administration.
So we've had, at least in our lifetime, in the last 100 years, we've had two interim chancellors. One was Bill McCoy, who was, we knew was there clearly as a stand-in for Michael Hooker, who was suffering from cancer. He'd had 2 stints actually, so he clearly was a caretaker. And then when Kevin Guskowitz came in, I think there was, while it was not published, there was a sort of a consensus. He didn't deny, nor did the Board of Trustees deny, that it was sort of a trial marriage to see what he thought about it, what they thought about him. And that's generally a category folks put you in. So do you see yourself at this point? How do you view yourself as a candidate for the long term?
You know, today is my 8-week anniversary on the job. I'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
But you have you made some strong statements about the importance of not losing time, of keeping. We want to. That was my favorite basketball coach was everybody remember Dean Smith. Get it down the court, you know, move it on down the court. So I think that in the spirit of Dean, those of us who followed Dean Smith more closely than you did, we appreciate you trying to move us on in a hurry. So you've been here long enough now. Why don't we start with what you would be doing if this were a business enterprise? Let's do a SWOT analysis. Universities are here, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats,
Sure.
and take all the time you need.
So I always like to note when people talk about running the university like a business or any state agency like a business, and I know that's not what you were suggesting, but just for the record, I don't think you can run the university like a business. All of the incentives are different, the mission is different, and doesn't mean there aren't principles from the private sector that can be applied, but I always kind of resist the idea that you can run a public academic enterprise in the way that you would run a private business. The strengths of the university are manifold and legion, and I learn about a different strength every day. It's just remarkable the breadth and depth of activity happening on our campus. We have 15 schools. We've just hired the dean for our newest school. 2 new schools have been created in the last 2 years, our School of Civic Life and Leadership and our School of Data Science and Society. They're the first 2 new schools in Carolina in 7 years. We're a global R1 research university. We're a member of the AAU, which is the most prestigious elite universities in the country. Our demand in an era when many colleges are seeing declining enrollment continues to climb. We had 68,000 applications for early decision this year, early action. Wow. If you just look at the last 2-year period, our applications have increased 18.6%. So incredibly strong demand for Carolina education. It remains extraordinarily affordable. Tuition, in-state undergraduate tuition has not moved $1 in the last 8 years. And that's obviously in nominal terms, and so in real terms, constant dollars, tuition gets cheaper every year. So those are tremendous strengths. We don't have time to list all of the fabulous things happening on campus every day, but we, as I said, continue to be surprised and impressed by the strength of the organization. Weaknesses, sometimes I say it's when the urgency of academia meets the efficiency of state government. You know, we don't always do things as certainly not as quickly and maybe not as efficiently as we could. It's a large, complex, extraordinarily decentralized organization, 44,000 students, faculty, and staff. Almost everybody is in a silo. There's just everyone's thinking about their school or their institute or their center. We have a very thin layer of senior administrators sitting in South Building who are thinking about the enterprise as a whole. And in some ways that's a strength because there's kind of this let 1,000 flowers bloom approach, and there's tremendous flexibility and independence for researchers and teachers to go out and create new knowledge. But every school runs in some ways like its own mini college. And some of their budgets are bigger than many of the schools that we have in the UNC system. They all run their own IT. They all run their own HR, their own purchasing. That's probably not a strength. That's probably not the best use of taxpayer money. I think you can make progress on that without in any way impacting the academic mission, just be better management. Opportunities, we could spend all day talking about the opportunities in front of us. The extraordinary thing about the enterprise that North Carolina citizens have built for the last 230 years is that it's extremely well positioned to take advantage of all of the trends that we see in front of us. So just to mention two off the top of my head quickly, nobody was thinking about, well, we do have some people on campus who were thinking about artificial intelligence 4 or 5 years ago, but it wasn't in our strategic plan. It's obviously one of the most important developments of any of our careers. As a global research university, we need a strategy around AI, both in terms of how we're going to use it in our own operations, how we're going to deploy it on campus for students and faculty and staff, and most exciting is what's our research focus going to be around AI, and I've had an awful lot of conversations about that since I started, and we're going to be announcing some more structure around that strategy. Another example is engineering. So we have extraordinary programs in some areas of engineering, applied physical sciences, biomedical engineering. There's tremendous demand for those disciplines. The students in them get hired in their junior year.
Does that cross over with NC State?
So, no, NC State is not, doesn't teach either of those particular areas. But as we think about what our engineering strategy should be, we obviously need to think about what NC State does and making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel. And that's not just true for NC State, it's true for North Carolina A&T and UNC Charlotte and some other schools in the system that have very strong engineering programs. One thing my experience on the Board of Governors gave me was the perspective that the system-wide perspective, not every school needs to have every possible function. That's an easier case to make when you're talking about one of our more regional campuses, and less so when you're talking about the global flagship. So that's something we've already had a lot of conversations about and that we'll continue to work on. But those are just two of the most high-profile opportunities. There's opportunity everywhere we look. Threats, we're extremely well positioned. So I wouldn't trade our strategic challenges for those of any other school that I know about. I mentioned the enrollment demand. Many schools are struggling with enrollment. We're obviously a fast-growing state. Even schools, you can think about a school like the University of Michigan, for all of its strength, for all of its resources, it's struggling with the fact that the state itself is not growing. The fact that we're in such a strongly growing state solves a lot of problems. We're also extremely well resourced. So our Vice Chancellor for Development, Mike Andresen, came from the University of Oregon. Oregon has about the same number of undergraduates we do, about 19,000 students. They get about $80 million a year from the state of Oregon. The comparable number for us is $630 million a year for the same number of undergraduates. So by any measure you want to look at, enrollment, finances, we're quite strong. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. It's a challenging time, I think, for higher education generally. If you look at the polling, the public's confidence in higher education has decreased materially in the last 5 or 10 years. We have challenges on campus with learning loss as a result of the pandemic, mental health challenges, not just among the students, but among the faculty and staff, investing a lot in that area. The campus climate right now in relation to the Gaza issue is pretty fraught, and some people think the most fraught that we've seen among the students in particular since Vietnam. And And so those are challenges we wrestle with, but they're certainly not unique to us. As I say, I wouldn't trade our challenges for any other school.
All right, so let me remind the folks that in about 10 minutes, we're going to open it to all of your questions. So get your questions ready. We're going to talk here about another 10 minutes or so, and then it's going to be up to you. Out of all of that, what's your number one priority?
Try not to mess anything up.
I will ask, well, at first I was somewhat surprised when Holden Thorpe had his first interview.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do these things on the radio, and this was about the same size audience we had then. I would ask Holden Thorpe, he instantly asked the question. He says, campus security, campus safety. He said if they don't feel safe if they're living in fear that they're not learning. How are we doing on that?
So it's a great question and a tremendously important issue. August 28th, as you all know, was a terrible day for everyone who cares about our campus and our community. I think a lot of lessons were learned. After that, the two aspects that maybe three aspects that we focus on the most are the lessons of August 28th and what we can do to improve physical campus security. We've installed more cameras. We'll put those cameras on a more centralized system. We're installing license plate readers. There's an after-action report in the wake of August 28th that has some other recommendations that we're implementing now. I hear a lot about safety and the perception of safety as it relates to the town and Franklin Street in particular, and we're in robust dialogue with the town about that. Something needs to change there. The status quo there, I don't think, is sustainable.
Is that a concern that Franklin Street's not safe?
At least doesn't feel safe to students, and I hear a lot about. I mean, if there's one issue I hear about more from students, and then especially parents and alumni and donors, it's conference realignment, where we're going to be playing football. But the second most important issue I hear about is Franklin Street and quote unquote what can be done to make Franklin Street feel more safe.
Is the perception detached from the reality?
You know, y'all are probably better placed to answer that question than I am. I hear a range of views about that, but in some sense it
Chris
doesn't.
Blue is Chris, are you here? Chris was our police chief, who is now our town manager.
I've had a couple of productive meetings with Chris on this topic. But in some sense it doesn't matter, because if it's perceived to be unsafe, then Franklin Street, and particularly the retail on Franklin Street, will suffer. And so we need to address the perception that Franklin Street isn't safe, at least at certain times of day.
So Lee, if someone asked me what I thought was the number one challenge of a new chancellor, in some respects it's no different than it's been in the last 200 years. I've gotten very interested in that topic and across the country. Universities everywhere live in some sort of state of constant turmoil. We had a cafeteria worker strike that got turned up. One of our chancellors, Chris Fordham, had to fight over the Moravian Star over the planetarium, and there were demonstrators. And Paul Hardin said Paul loved to tell the story, when he was appointed chancellor, Jesse Helms called him a liberal communist. And before he left there, he had Jesse Jackson staging a sit-in outside his office because he was not moving fast enough on the Black Cultural Center, which was antithetical to his views that he wasn't trying to separate the races, trying to put them all together. And now today, we look at it, at least in the last 10 years, the last chancellor at this university who left in a celebratory way was James Measer. The other three were all kind of chased out. One over athletic, but the last two were chased out in what most folks would say were political conflicts between the legislature, board of governors, board of trustees, and the faculty. And interestingly enough, our last two presidents at the university, Erskine Bowles was the last president to leave happily. The last two were left in before Peter Hans was. The last two were involuntarily. You've got a faculty that always believes that it runs the university, and without the faculty, you don't have a university. So, and Kevin Guskovitz, he is a listener, he's conciliatory, he has great political skills, and he could not successfully navigate those waters to the point that it could keep his job. How do you deal with that? But you've got to deal.
You could never come here.
I just think it's an interesting challenge, and I don't know the answer, but I know you had to be thinking about it.
It's certainly a challenging role. There are a lot of constituencies for any university president or chancellor. We have a few more constituencies in our governance structure. You know, at a lot of schools, the president has to worry about faculty, students, staff, alumni, donors, and the board. Here we have a board of trustees and a system board, and obviously the General Assembly.
I will add to that Holden Thorpe once said that he set the national championship for the Rubik's Cube, and he said he had to keep a list to keep up with the number of bosses. It's something like 6 bosses.
Yeah, although in truth, I only have one actual boss. I report to Peter Hahn, who's the system president, and for all of the complexity in our organizational structure, that part is quite clear, and that's a good thing. I'd rather report to one boss than to a board. And as a private university president. Chancellor Measer, by the way, as you all probably know, has an office on campus and could not have been more helpful and solicitous to me. It's wonderful. I can see his office from my office, and having a former chancellor there on campus is just a great benefit to me. There's no question that it's a job that comes with a lot of cross currents and a lot of challenges, but it's also, so far, it's been tremendously rewarding and a lot of fun. You know, I had one day, it wasn't this past Monday, but the Monday before, we got to go to the governor's mansion where we were honoring our national champion field hockey team, coached by our 23-year-old head coach, who's the first person in the history of the school to win a national championship as both a player and as a coach, and she's done at 23 years old, becoming the face of the sport across the country. That night, the Smith Center was built in 1986, and no one had ever scored more points in the building than R.J. Davis did last Monday night, 42 points. So that was a pretty good day. You can say, you know, there's a lot of fun things about the job.
Does it help that, without regard to how you vote, your political leanings suggest conservative, suggest you were appointed by a Republican, Patrick Rory, and I think you were on Art Pope's board. Those are well-known conservative people that support the university. So it would seem to me, would I be wrong in presuming that you get a leg up there?
It's really not my question to answer. I mean, I feel as though I have good
Well,
relationships.
pretend that nobody's here. We're just having a beer.
I feel as though I have good relationships with obviously with the Board of Governors, having come from there. And the Board of Trustees has been tremendously supportive. I think it's important for any chancellor to make sure that he or she personally and as an institution has good, strong relationships with the General Assembly, and I spend a lot of time with them.
Tough question about Wilson Library.
Yeah.
A while ago you said we are not short of resources, and yet the library it's the most under-resourced facility. Right now there's no reliable, sustaining, renewable funding for the library. And we were going to do this $31 million refit, and we closed it down, and now we said, well, we didn't have it properly planned, and so we've taken that money and done something else with it while we start all over again. How do we fix the library? Funding.
So just some background for people who don't pay as much attention to library renovation projects as we
Let's have a high profile one. I'm a news guy. We go after that story of the day.
So Wilson Library, obviously a showcase, not just for Carolina, but for the state. It was built to be that quite intentionally. The legislature appropriated money for the Wilson Library as a way of saying we're going to build this showcase on our campus, and it's going to be one of the most impressive university libraries in the South. It was consciously built that way from the beginning. The plan that was that we were proceeding down was one of shutting the library for at least 3, maybe 4 years, spending an enormous amount of money. When the library reopened, it wasn't going to look any different than it does right now. It was all to fix the HVAC systems and the roof and put in some fire suppression. So then people started to say, is that really the best use of resources for what we're going to get at the end? Everyone agrees that the library needs to remain a showcase and a centerpiece of our campus. The question is just what's the best way to do it.
I guess the idea of combining the library with the Smith Center and the new basketball arena probably not good. Okay, I have more, but okay, it's your turn. Are there any questions out there in the back? I see Jennifer, you're helping with the mic. Here we go. I've got. Listen, if you're going to talk, get up, please. Okay. Cliff, do you have a question or a speech?
The 68,000 students, and a little over 4,000 places, so that's 64,000 people.
Sorry, we have about 30,000 students.
I'm talking about their applications.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
68,000 applications, and your freshman class is over 4,000.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of different disappointed people. And we've got the old airport area that was going to be Chapel Hill North, and you could snap your fingers, double the size of the campus, and it would still be 60,000 disappointed people. So what are you doing to, the state, like you said, the state's growing fast, and we're not growing as fast as the state is.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can snap your fingers and double the size of the school, but you're right in that every year we admit a smaller percentage of North Carolina's graduating high school seniors. So we haven't grown really effectively at all in the last 50 years, and the state's doubled in size. So that's an important conversation to have. Are we fulfilling our mission the way everyone wants us to be fulfilling our mission by staying flat from an enrollment standpoint, or is there a case to be made for some kind of growth in enrollment? And we're actually announcing a task force to look at that in the coming weeks. It's an important discussion to have.
Back at the back.
Yeah, so my question is, we hear a lot about political interference with the university. For those of us on the outside, that's a phrase that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. Like Jim mentioned, I was here, or talking about Jesse Helm, I was here when he was constantly loudly complaining about the school. He didn't seem to involve himself in it very much. I mean, has the nature of the interference in the university changed in some way? And how would you characterize it? How would we understand it on the outside as to what's going on politically?
So I don't have the institutional history that, say, D.G. Martin and some other folks here have. But I have talked to all of my predecessors, and they have all regaled me with stories of the General Assembly making them do things they didn't want to do, no matter who was in charge in Raleigh. And there's an article in the Alumni magazine back in the fall about the history of the engineering school and why Carolina used to have one and doesn't have one now. And the bottom line is that Governor Omax Gardner reached into Carolina, pulled the engineering school out, and put it at NC State. Direct interference in the curriculum by a sitting governor. So my sense is while the General Assembly and politicians are going to be involved. We're a public flagship, we're spending billions of dollars of taxpayer money. There's not much that's new about that. But again, I don't have the same perspective that maybe some others have.
Are you going to the Duke, North Carolina game, and who are you going to pull for?
I'm not going anywhere near the Duke, North Carolina. But whenever this question comes up, I say that there's only one thing I have to say about this issue, and that one thing is go Heels.
You will be running for mayor after you get thrown out of the chancellor's job.
So with your background in investment banking and not liking law school or being a lawyer, which was very smart, I think, with all deference to the very skilled lawyers in the room, and I want to ask you the question, then I'm going to make a suggestion to you. Okay. The first question I want to ask is, what is your passion? You're very measured. You're very thoughtful. What is your passion? And the comment I'm going to make is about a predecessor who was very connected to Duke University, who became chancellor, Paul Harvey.
Yeah.
In 1991, I think it is, the Final Four in Indianapolis, and I forget who Carolina played. And after that game, the next day, the morning, there was a breakfast of the Rams Club that Dick Padula probably had something to do with. And I'll never forget this. I have my little boys, my twin sons, and we're there, and Paul Harden comes in. It's a beautiful day in Indianapolis. And says, yeah, last night was bad, but it's a gloriously beautiful day. And all of us felt like, hell no, it wasn't a good day. How can it be a good day after Carolina? So I'm going to suggest, and loses in the Final Four, so I suggest you never take that approach from your predecessor at Duke. But back to the question, what is your passion?
So I told you a little bit about my experience with higher education. I do care a lot about higher education. I care a lot about the future of this state. I believe that the future belongs to North Carolina. I raised my family here, built a business here, not going anywhere. I also believe in it. It always sounds a little bit corny when I say it, but Jim told you a little bit about my parents and my grandparents. I believe in public service. I think it's something that's important. I think we all have an obligation to give back to the institutions that mean everything to our state and to our country. So you're right. I'm a pretty even keel kind of guy, but I do feel strongly about that.
More questions?
Yeah, a couple of quick ones here. I'm an out-of-state person who went to the University of North Carolina, and I get this question a lot from people who are in a similar position, that they can't believe that North Carolina only lets 18% of its undergrads to come from out of state, and now that I live here, I get people who say they can't believe they let so many as 18% come from out of state. I know you're an out-of-stater too, but you live here now. I wonder if you have any perspective on that in your current role. And the second question is, just because you brought it up, SEC, Big Ten, ACC, what do you want to see Carolina do?
You might have just, in those short remarks, mentioned two of the most controversial issues that we have. Out-of-state cap, obviously a constant topic of debate and discussion. I think you framed it well. There are some people who think it's way too high, and there are some people who think it's way too low. I would observe, and I'm not sure if this is broadly perceived, but the system has raised the out-of-state cap for most schools in the system. The only two who are at 18% now are Carolina and NC State. Most schools have gone to 25%. Some schools have gone to 50%. But most schools in the system have enrollment challenges that we're fortunate not to have. That's set by Board of Governors policy, as you know. Conference realignment. I met with the ACC commissioner yesterday here in Capitol Hill. Vicky Bedore would tell you, I think, and anybody else who spent their careers in college athletics, that no one's ever seen a period of this much where college sports have been in flux to this degree. It's not just conference realignment, it's NIL. And I think we're very well positioned for a tremendously strong school and set of athletics programs by any measure that you want to look at. And my job and the job of everyone who cares about Carolina is to make sure that when the dust settles, Carolina is better off. I can't tell you right now what that's going to look like, but again, I like how we're positioned.
I have a quick question about that. And my guess is 10 years from now, this question will be anachronistic, will be old history. But I go back, I think, particularly about Paul Harden, who incurred some unhappiness from our basketball coach when he insisted that his Nike contract be made public, and the coach did not like that very much. And we've also had our share over the years. We don't like to talk about it, but I won't do about it. We had a team that won a national championship, and a year or two later, we put on NCAA probation, and then we had the issues that Holden had to deal with a football program that I don't remember the level, but it was enough to warrant that. If you've got a coach whose program is cheating and the coach knows it, what do you do?
If they're cheating, they have to be fired. I mean, I don't think there's any ambiguity about that. Where the ambiguity comes in is that a lot of things that were pretty clearly cheating just a few years ago are now permissible under in the new landscape, and so
hard to figure out. Truly,
it's
harder than ever.
It's in some ways a free for all, and I'm not sure we're going to get a lot more clarity, at least on the NIL side.
Yeah, most folks agree that that's broken. Yeah, Brian.
Lee, thank you. You might have touched on it, but as you might have noticed, it's the season for State of the Union addresses. So if we happen to get you over here next year, and you're now making your State of the Union address now, what are we going to be looking forward to seeing?
It's a great question. I would hope that we would have made progress on some of these strategic challenges. What's our AI strategy? What's our engineering strategy? What's our enrollment strategy? We need to update the fiscal master plan for the campus, which hasn't been done in quite some time. That entails a lot of the new projects that we have on the books, as well as renovation projects like Wilson Library. So when I think at a high level, those are the kinds of things that I think about.
I compliment your wife on her passion for the art of North Carolina. It's a beautiful book. I recommend it to anybody that has not seen it. So I knew her from that standpoint before I ever heard of you. And so you have a lot to live up to. But I have kind of a tough question.
Yeah.
Faculty recruitment. I am a graduate of one of the 15 schools, and I would argue that we traded a Tier 1 dean for maybe a Tier 3 dean. So just talk about the challenges that face, particularly females. We are lucky enough to have Jody Magnus in our Rotary Club. I don't think she's here today, but there is some concerns. So just to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks. I'd love to know who you think is a Tier 3 dean, because I've been very impressed with the deans across the board. You know, we have, of our 15 deans, I think 9 have been in the job less than 2 years, and just off the top of my head, more than half of them are women. There's no question that faculty recruitment is a challenge. It's a competitive environment. We're constrained by factors that not everybody is constrained by, including the State Human Resources Act and the banding that we have to put faculty in. We don't have as much flexibility on faculty compensation as a private school would be. There are some things we can address and some things we can't address. we probably can't address the State Human Resources Act. One thing we can address is the bureaucracy and red tape around faculty hiring. So I've heard a lot from deans in particular about how it takes too long to hire faculty. And in particular, they don't know where they stand in the process. And so when they're recruiting somebody in a competitive effort, they can't tell that candidate whether our process is going to take another 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. So, we have this operational excellence team housed in the chancellor's office, which I was delighted to learn about when I got here. It's like a mini internal management consulting firm. And the first thing I asked them to do was work on this issue, the faculty hiring process, and how we make it more streamlined and more transparent. So I'm hopeful that we can make improvements in that area.
Steve, stand up, please.
And recently, when we had someone else from university come talk to us, they spent a lot of time talking about remote learning. This is a subject you've not touched on. Where do we stand with regard to that? Thank you.
So remote learning, I think everybody was forced to realize during the pandemic that it was a gut check on how good your remote learning capabilities were, and I think a lot of folks realized that we weren't where we needed to be.
But I'm not just talking about, though, when students couldn't be on campus. I mean, in foreign countries.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. I'm just saying we learned a lot about what we could and couldn't do. So far, our remote learning has been focused in two specific areas. One is in targeted professional programs. We have an excellent remote MBA program. It's considered a national leader. It costs the same as the in-person MBA program, and therefore is financially very attractive for the school, but there's also tremendous demand for it, and is running extremely well. And then what they call adult learners, folks who either never went to college or maybe got some college but never finished their degree, and how do we address them not just as a university campus but as a statewide system. And there's a significant initiative that Peter Hans, the system president, has put in place to make it much easier for every school in the system to get its courses up onto a centralized online platform for adult learners to take advantage of. What we have not done in any kind of systematic way is make our undergraduate residential experience available remotely, and we're probably a ways away from doing that.
Well, fellow Rotarians, I'm sorry to announce that Lee has to leave at 1:55 to 2. So Lee, let me just summarize what I believe I would be speaking for the club today. You and I have just spent more time together than any time previous to that, and I've watched you handle all of the tough questions and the way that you've articulated, and I have a hunch that I'm speaking for most of the folks in the room when I say that I'm comforted and inspired by what you brought here today. I feel very comfortable having you in the corner of that building. So thank you very much for coming in.